Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for joining on this wonderful Thursday. Drop some emojis or say hi and mention where you're calling in from in the chat. Really excited for this jam-packed session. Going to give everyone a few minutes to pile in.
Oh man, this is great. There are so many friends here. This is wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Hi,
so many familiar names.
guys.
Great to see everyone.
Nancy,
lots of bookkeeping buds too. Oh, Stephanie, hi. Oh, this is great. I don't know if I actually want to do the whole webinar now. Can we just hang out in chat?
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll let Josh take it from here.
Yeah. I'm going to impress everybody with my 1099 skills.
Yeah, right.
Nancy,
I'll be in chat, hanging out with my friends.
Yeah, I feel like you bop around to so many different webinars. You're a common face now. So it's incredible.
Oh gosh, I don't think I'm very common at all.
Yeah, common is maybe not the right word.
Yeah, it's great. This has been a really big year for us. You know, we struggled so much during the pandemic. It was rough. It was really, really rough. And so there were a lot of things that we wanted to do that were either internal improvements or, working on the education and outreach for bookkeepers cohort that I've been wanting to put together for years now. Those things all had to pause. They all had to take a back seat. And this year, we're finally making those internal improvements, like implementing Keeper is, one of them. And in being able to take the time to do that, I'm getting really excited about some of these things. And so I want to get out there and tell the world, you don't have to struggle like we struggled. Here are some things that can help.
Yep. Well, awesome. Appreciate you spreading the word, Nancy.
Yeah.
All right, let's.
So many bookkeeping buds in here. This is great.
Yeah, this is awesome. Looks like we got 100+ folks in here. Let's dive in. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Really excited to talk about how to navigate the 1099 storm and how to build 1099s into your monthly workflows. As I mentioned, going to be a jam-packed session. And before we dive in, just a little intro into what's planned today. We'll start off with some introductions. As most of you have already met Nancy and seen her around, she'll be helping out today along with our resident CPA at Keeper, Chad Pues. So we'll start with introductions, some horror stories. I'm sure these stories have impacted a lot of you all as well in your 1099 trials and tribulations. And then I'll hand it over to Nancy to do some fundamentals of 1099 and W-9s, what to know, what's changed, how to plan for 2024, especially when the pain is fresh and you've just gone through a difficult 1099 season. We'll then hand it over to Chad. Chad will talk about how Keeper is really automating and streamlining this process for tons of bookkeepers and accountants out there. And throughout the process, would love for you all to drop your questions in the question section. We'll definitely save time for a Q&A at the end. And if we don't get to your questions, we got a great team at Keeper that will follow up with you after. I've already seen people ask. This webinar will be recorded and shared after. I know a lot of you are busy right now, but this is a good session, so stay tuned. And if you have to jump, we will send this out after. All right. Excited to introduce the awesome crew. I think Nancy said she is not common. She is eccentric. She's awesome. And she's been nothing but the best to help keep her out. So Nancy McClelland, a CPA, firm owner at the Dancing Accountant. As I mentioned, Chad Pues, an account executive on the team. And then myself, just an individual in the background, but the two that are speaking today are the important ones. So, all right, awesome. I am going to hand it over to Nancy to start with a horror story about 1099s.
All right. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here. Anything I can do to help bookkeepers become more efficient and less stressed and feel pride in what they do and highlight their value is something that I am excited about. And Keeper plays a really, really, really big part in that. I see so many bookkeeping buds in here. Anna and Megan, and I think I saw Teresa. There's Melissa, so many wonderful people. I see you. I know you're here, and I am so excited that you came. And to everybody I haven't met yet, hi, I'm Nancy, the dancing accountant, and I have a horror story for you. Now, I want to highlight that this happened a long time ago, and I bet a lot of people here are too young to remember the days when we used to have to print out and stick and stuff envelopes and stick stamps on envelopes and get these things postmarked by January 31st. It was a miserable, miserable, miserable time. So there are some things that were way harder back then. And there are some things, honestly, that are way harder now than they were back then. Like back then, pretty much everybody paid through AP, or they just wrote checks. And we didn't have to deal with the zillions and zillions and zillions of different payment methods that we deal with today. But some things never change. The amount of time it takes to collect a W-9 from a vendor that doesn't want to give it to you, and the need for the books to be up to date before you can even fully review for vendors. Those are the same things that way back then we had to deal with and we're still dealing with today. So those things were a real pain in my rear. And I was having a really tough time handling all these 1099s alone. At the time, I was still a sole proprietor. So this is back in the day. And so I asked a friend of mine who was a non-practicing CPA if she could help me out with 1099 season. She said, sure, no problem. Well, I found out a couple days before January 31st because without something like Keeper to manage these projects, I couldn't see the process. There was no transparency about where she was in that process. And so a couple days beforehand, she's like, I'm having trouble getting W-9s from like these 100 people. And and these clients, their books aren't up to date. So I just didn't know what to do. And I'm like, it's 2 days before the deadline. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, it ended up being January 31st at her place with her husband, my husband, and me frantically going through and entering numbers into the software that I used to do back then, printing them out on perforated paper, and then stuffing the envelopes and then stamping the envelopes. And I had to drive down to the main post office in Chicago right before midnight on January 31st to get them stamped. If I had Keeper back then, none of that would have happened. None of that would happen. It was awful. It's what I still think of where no matter how awful January is now, I think of that and I'm like, oh God, it's so much better than it used to be. Even though it's worse than it used to be in some ways, it is, I will never have to do that again. And that helps me sleep at night. Now I know Chad has a story too. Chad's is a little bit more serious than mine.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And I mean, your story, I can completely resonate with it. Getting into January and just feeling behind and scrambling to pick up the pieces at the deadline. What Josh is showing here on the screen is actually a hospital discharge form screenshot from my visit to the hospital on the 7th of January, 2021, when I had a panic attack because I had been working towards running those year-to-date spend calcs, identifying those eligible vendors, and doing it all manually within QBO for that first week of January after the holidays. And by the 7th, I was like, oh my gosh, I still have so much to do. I still have dozens of clients to identify those eligible vendors, collect those 1099s, or those W-9s rather, and I'm not even close. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Followed that with panic attacks, chest pains, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is scary. So long story short, went to the hospital just to be safe, make sure I'm not going to die. All good. Just a panic attack. But from that 1099 season forward, I was like, I can't keep doing this anymore. Like, there's got to be a different way. We've got to be able to stay on top of this, so that way we don't have to scramble in January anymore. And luckily, I discovered Keeper and found some tools within it to help make that process easier to stay on top of, month after month throughout the year, rather than scrambling in January.
I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat go, well, that puts things into perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Like 1099.
Now, it may put things into perspective, but I mean, January sucks, guys. It still sucks. It's not like January's a party anymore, but it's just not that kind of stress anymore.
Right. Everyone talks about April being the worst month for accountants and bookkeepers, but no, January takes the cake there by far.
It does.
I'm glad you're able to be here and tell that story, Chad.
Yeah. Josh is like, I'm so glad I'm in marketing.
I wasn't at the level of, bookkeeping. I worked at KPMG. We had our busy months. I think I probably had panic attacks for other reasons, but the 1099 horror stories that I've heard on Facebook channels from Chad, maybe KPMG was where it's at. I came out lucky, I guess. So no, that's crazy. Thanks for sharing, both of you. Nancy, going to turn it back over to you to really set the tone. And I know there's tons of variations of the 1099 tax form, and we'd love to get into the weeds, but for the sake of time, and we know everybody's busy in January, we're really going to
Nobody wants to get into the weeds. I'm going to have to disagree with you. Nobody wants to get into the weeds on this. And I'm going to take you a little bit into the weeds, but not all the way into the weeds. Okay, so first, I want to highlight that since I don't have enough time here to go through every single possible 1099 that's out there that we might have to deal with, there is a link at the bottom of the slide that I know these slides will go out to everybody who registered. So there's a link at the bottom of the slide and also in the resource page. I have an article called When Do I Have to Issue a 1099 Form to Someone I Paid? That is out on MSN, and a lot of the bookkeeping buds help me every year get that article cleaner and cleaner and add stuff and change stuff. And it is a really lovely, pretty comprehensive article. So if you do want to get into the weeds, that's a good place to go. The ones that we're going to talk about today are just the NEC and the MISC. They, as most of the people on this call probably know, up until a few years ago, there really was, for non-employee compensation, there really was just the 1099 MISC. And there are a lot of different boxes on that form. And the royalties would go in one box and the rent would go into another box. And there was one box called non-employee compensation. And what happened a few years ago is the IRS realized that the gig economy is just exploding. And the deadline for that MISC was that to get the stuff to the IRS, because the deadline to get this stuff postmarked or sent out, via secure link to vendors is January 31st. But all of these different forms have much later dates for this information having to get to the IRS. Well, they realized that people were filing their tax returns. People in the gig economy, freelancers, et cetera, were filing their tax returns and they were omitting this non-employee compensation. And they said, we can't wait until the end of February or the end of March to get this information on these people. We need to get that information a lot sooner. So what they did is they split out just the non-employee compensation, which is what NEC stands for. And they actually reused an old form from the 1980s. I'm not old enough to have been doing taxes back in the 1980s. There might be a few people on here who've been through that, and you might recognize that form. They put it back into service. And so now the NEC is the bane of our existence. That doesn't mean we don't have to fill out MISC for the rent or the royalty or attorney settlements. It doesn't mean we don't have to fill out 1099 int for interest or 1099 div for dividends or 1099 PATR for patronage. We might have all of those to fill out as well, But the bane of our existence, because of its due date, is this NEC. And that's why we're going to focus on those today. Next slide. All right, so W-9, we all know the W-9, but our clients and our vendors and the vendors of our clients, they do not get this. When we ask them for a W-9, we are not saying to them, you are going to get a 1099. That is not what we're saying. We're saying we don't know. We don't know if there might be a 1099 or not that has to be given to you. And so as a result, we're going to give you this W-9, and it is simply information collection. Now, I have been learning from Nicole Davis. There is no such thing as over communicating. Your clients will prefer more communication rather than less communication. The more that we can educate our clients to educate their vendors, or that we can now through Keeper, we can educate the vendors directly as well, which is awesome. We'll get to that a little bit later. The more we can educate them that the W-9 is just for information collecting and it doesn't mean they're going to get a 1099, the better off everybody is going to be. And I will tell you that if we can actually get our clients to require a W-9 from their vendors before they pay them, then we're not even going to have to get to the point in Keeper where we collect the W-9 from the vendor, because it's only once that information, that payment is popping up in QuickBooks Online, which is syncing with Keeper, which is beautiful. That's where we're seeing, oh, hey, there's a new vendor. We should send them a W-9. We should, identify whether or not we have to do something about that. So if we can educate our clients, please send this out beforehand. We're all going to be better off. And if we can educate the vendors, this is just collecting information. We're all going to be better off. Now, once you get that W-9, it is not your problem if they filled it out wrong or not, okay? That W-9, having that in your file and your client having that in your file means that even if somebody lied to you on that W-9 or they didn't know how to fill it out and they did it wrong, that is not your problem. Now, I have a wonderful colleague and bookkeeping buds named Question Telka who put together a really lovely video series on how to fill out a W-9. That is really, really, really lovely. So that's another thing that you can communicate to your clients, send them this and say, hey, you can send this to your vendors. And if the vendor is unsure about how to fill out that W-9, here you go. So the more that you can get the client to do ahead of time because they have those personal relationships with those vendors, again, the better off we're all going to be. Now, say somebody fills out that W-9 and they end up having to it turns out that because they filled out that W-9 and you've paid them for all these different, in all these different ways and so on, and they have to get a 1099. Now's the part where we're like, okay, let's go into Keeper and let's mark that this person is in fact eligible for a 1099 or that they're not. And if you mark that they're not, you never have to see them again. All those corporations that over and over and over again would show up in our QuickBooks reports that we were running in order to do this process before we started using Keeper, I don't have to worry about it again. Once I mark them as not needing a 1099, that's it. So next slide. And here's the basic rule. If you are a non-corporation, if you paid a non-corporation, a lot of people get confused about that. They think it's if you paid an individual. That is not the rule. It's if you paid a non-corporation, which means if it is a single member LLC, you get a 1099. I feel like I'm that Oprah picture on the front. You get a 1099 if you are a single member LLC. If you're a multi-member LLC and you haven't done a corporate election, then you get a 1099. If you are a partnership, you get a 1099. There are lots of non-individuals that get 1099. And when we let clients DIY this process, they skip those people. They skip those people. We see errors over and over and over. If you have a practice where the client is telling you who their 1099 vendors are and you are issuing those 1099 vendors, I guarantee you're missing some 1099 vendors. This really is something that should, it's a responsibility that even though I don't want it, I hate 1099 season, I hate doing 1099s, but I care about my clients. I want this responsibility to be on my shoulders because I and my amazing team, they're the ones who are really doing all this work. But the people who are us, we know how to identify these vendors. And I see that Diamond is mentioning in the chat that if they're an attorney, even if they're a corporation, they get a 1099. That's a detail that's in the weeds, but it's a really important detail that we're going to know that our clients aren't going to know. So if you accidentally send a 1099 to somebody who it turns out filled out their W-9 wrong and they're really incorporated, or you didn't get, I just got one yesterday from a colleague who I work with, and I got one. She's doing this for a client that is a client that was share. And I got 1099. I was like, hey guys, check that W-9 on file. And it turns out the client had never given them the W-9s that they had on file. So there are a lot of people there are a lot of rules. There are a lot of people who are going to need a 1099 that your client is not going to be able to identify. So the rule is if you paid a non-corporation, this is the general rule, there are exceptions, like the attorney, the incorporated attorneys. If you paid a non-corporation for services, not products, services, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the heck that is later because it's not as obvious as you would think, via check, cash, ACH, Zelle, wire transfer, but not merchant services or electronic payments, such as credit and debit cards, blah, 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 blah. There's a super long list of these. And it's $600 or more in a calendar year, then that's when you send a 1099. Next slide, please.
Hey, Nancy, quick question.
Yeah.
For clients who use personal PayPal or Venmo sole props, do we need to 1099 those? That's a question.
We sure do. We sure do. If they're using personal PayPal, if they're using personal Venmo, if they're using any of those, or friends and family, if they check mark the box for friends and family, you do need to send a 1099 for those. And this is a resource that I want to highlight that is so very valuable, priceless, really, in my opinion, that's in the resource section, is that Diamond, who mentioned the exception for incorporated attorneys in the chat, she actually has gone so far into the weeds on this that I am amazed she ever came back out. And she has this amazing resource where and it is a paid resource, but it's worth every penny, where she lists all of these weird ones where you're like, what about Pluto if I used it this way and not that way? What about Square if this or that? What about Stripe? What about blah, 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 blah? I mean, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about it was harder when we had to do these things on paper, but it was also much easier because we didn't have all of these fintech companies going, here are all of these things. And here's the problem is that when the IRS set the rule, instead of defining what was going to have a 1099 and what wasn't going to have to have a 1099 NEC, they gave some general guidance and they let these various vendors decide for themselves whether that guidance applied to them or not, which is how we have Zelle as somebody that you do need to issue a 1099 for, is that they're like, we're not a third party electronic payment provider. And I'm like, that's funny because I use Zelle a lot and gee, that looks like a third party electronic payment to me, but it's not because they looked at the IRS guidance and found some loophole and decided that they're not. So if you have questions about the real specifics, if you've got like, I don't know about this one and that one and the other one, check out Diamond's resource in the slide at the end. Next slide, please.
Great call outs there, Nancy. Just like speaking from experience, I remember one year I tried to get in contact with someone from Zelle to try and confirm this. Like, are you going to issue a 1099K for these payments? And of course, they had no idea what I was talking about, and no. I took that to be a no. Yeah, great call outs on some of the exceptions there. Yeah,
definitely. Diamond, I do want to know, but if you could put it in the chat, because I got to keep going, because I got to keep us on time. Put in the chat why Zelle doesn't issue one. She honestly, this woman, she knows her stuff. She knows her stuff. Okay, so when to file, all the dates are on there, but there are a couple of things I want to highlight in particular here, is that these didn't used to be big penalties. They used to be really small, and so people didn't really care if they got all the vendors or not. They didn't really care if they hit the deadlines or not because the penalties were small. The IRS through the years has just stepped them up and up and up and up and up. And now we're actually talking big money if this stuff doesn't get filed. But here's the thing. In my personal experience, the only time that the IRS is really going to get on your case is if it is egregious and if you're just not filing that 1099 at all. It is so much better to file late than not at all. And I'm going to tell you why. I am also a tax preparer. And when we are preparing our clients' returns, the IRS, over the course of the past few years, has started adding a little box that says, did you or will you? Did you or will you file a 1099 for all of the vendors that need it? Now, I cannot legally check that box or let that client file a return where they have checked the box if I know that they have it. I can't do that. And so you're not doing your clients a service, and you're certainly not improving your relationship with that CPA if you know that the clients aren't including all of their vendors in the 1099s. But the important part here is that it doesn't say, did you file it on time? They don't care if you filed it on time or not. I mean, they care, right? But they don't care. And so I have had situations where you've got a client who didn't have their books together. And as a result, they went on extension for their income tax return. And they took forever and ever and ever and ever. And now we're looking at the September business return extension deadline. We're looking at the October sole proprietor extension deadline. And these people are just now getting their books together. And we're like, oh, look, you needed to send out those 1099s. We'll do it in September. We'll do it in October. We will issue those 1099s because it is the vendor's responsibility to report that income anyway. If they didn't report that income because they didn't get a 1099, then you should keep better records. That's my opinion. And so the IRS is going to get that information and they're going to compare it to the tax return under that social security number or EIN that was filed. And if that language is, if that dollar amount, if that 1099 total is missing, if that income is missing, they're going to get a CP notice at some point. And so this is why it's super important. Protect your clients. You're not protecting their vendors. You're protecting your clients. They want to be able to check that box saying, did you or will you? Yes, I know that by the time that return gets filed, even if it's late, we will have filed the 1099s for that client. So please, next slide. All right. So some key changes to be aware of. The IRS reduced the electronic filing threshold down to 10 forms. Now, we don't care about this as bookkeepers and accountants, right? Because we've been using Check 1099 or Tax 1099 or QuickBooks, we've been filing these electronically for a really long time. And now we're not talking about delivering these to the vendors. We're talking about filing with the IRS, right? Sending the copy of these that we used to have to do on paper, and thank goodness we don't have to anymore. We don't care about that, but you know what? Our clients should, because I have a lot of clients that want to DIY in order to save money, right? So we know that when the clients DIY, they're skipping vendors accidentally because they don't have the education that we have, and they're ordering the free forms from the IRS, and they're filling them out by hand. They can't do that anymore if they have more than 10 forms. So I anticipate that this year, you're going to get a lot of last minute from the vendors that have never asked you to do it before going, oh no, I can't do this anymore. And if it didn't happen this year, they're going to get a notice in the mail so that next year, they're really going to ask you. So keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean they can't still file their own 1099s if they have more than 10 forms, because the IRS, in order to accommodate them, has launched Iris, which is a new free online portal for businesses to do this. No bookkeepers and accountants cannot use this portal. This is individually for the business. They are the only ones that can use this. So if there was anybody who was getting excited that they don't have to maintain their Track 1099 subscription, no. I want to talk about 1099K for a second. It is something that affects us a lot, even though we don't have to file them. That's a variant of Form 1099 that is all of those ones that we don't have to send a 1099 NEC or MISC out for because of the third-party merchant services, electronic payments, all of that stuff that we're talking about a ton in the chat. The 1099K is going to cover that. Now, these 1099Ks, they are awful from a CPA tax preparer's perspective because that 1099K shows everything that was processed through it, whether it was income or not. So sales tax is in there, tips are in there, gift cards are in there, all this stuff that's sitting on the balance sheets, it's in there. And so reconciling the 1099K against the actual income that's being reported on that client's tax return is seriously a pain. It is not fun at all. We have a whole reconciliation process internally. So help your CPAs out, help your tax preparers out that you're working with and work together on this. And you can give them the information that will tell them, hey, this is how much happened in tips and this is how much that happened. All these things, give them that reconciliation. Do the 1099 reconciliation for them. And then they know that they can just use the number that is income on your profit and loss in order to prepare the income tax return. Let's see. Okay, so a couple weird things. Your clients may have vendors that got paid through third-party merchant service for some of their stuff and through AP, checks, Zelle, whatever for some of their stuff. They also might have had their contractors go through Gusto or some other kind of service that is going to issue that 1099 for you. Well, kinda. Look at my most recent MSN article on that one. But anyway, they may have done that and then paid them directly through check or Zelle or ACH for other things. It's okay for them to get to 1099s from the same vendor. That is okay. You just don't want to overlap that money. But I get this question. It's probably the most common question I get about 1099s, 1099 season is if the stuff that went through merchant services is going to come through on that 1099K, you need to issue a 1099 for the rest of it. And in our firm, we do that even if it's less than $600 because the vendor did get more than $600 throughout the course of the year. That's not an IRS rule. That's just a best practice. Same thing with Gusto. If the stuff that went through Gusto, they're getting a 1099 for that. And then you have some of those checks that went out to them or Zelle or whatever. And if that's less than 600 in that situation, I definitely, because we're talking about an NEC 1099 in both of those situations. So even if it's less than 600 in those kinds of situations, we do send those out. Next slide, please. Okay, I got that from Diamond. 1099s shouldn't be this hard, right? And it's true, they shouldn't be this hard. You guys, in the chat, should they be this hard? If anybody says yes, I am unfriending you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be this hard.
It is.
Determining and tracking which clients want the 1099 prep in the first place. Identifying which of these vendors are eligible. Determining vendor entity types, especially like the LLC that's got the S-Corp election that doesn't know how to fill out the W-9 properly. Defining what constitutes a service should be so obvious, but it's not. It's like, well, it was a grant, but it was a grant so they could perform these services. Does that count or not? I don't know. That is hard. Who actually paid for the service? That should be an obvious one. But lots of times we got a situation where we're paying like somebody, let's say the company owner, or representative of the company paid the vendor. And then we're reimbursing that person. Well, really the company, come on, the company paid the vendor, even though the company didn't really pay the vendor. We know that the company paid the vendor. I mean, I would issue a 1099 in that situation, though that's a loophole you could probably use to get around issuing them if you really wanted to argue it. Calculating the eligible year-to-date spend, again, other types of reimbursements where like you're reimbursing the contractor for stuff, but you're also paying them for services. And the various payment, there are like 8,000 payment methods, you guys. I'm not kidding. It's ridiculous. Dealing with vendors who refuse to fill out a W-9, you guys, I have language on that is in our instructions internally for what our team copies and pastes and sends to that vendor who's refusing to fill out that W-9. And I say, gosh, that is such a real shame because the IRS requires us to file a 1099 for you anyway. And to put, you can do this in Track 1099 to say basically that they refused to give you the information. If you're doing them physically, on paper, we would write refused in the tax ID boxes. We would write refused. And it's so sad that we got to do that because you know what? That's going to get you audited. And we don't want that. Nobody wants that. Right? That's what we do. To this day, I have almost always finally gotten that W-9 after sending that out. Missing a 1099 vendor because it was in an unusual account. You've got 1099 vendors that are doing startup costs for businesses that haven't started operations yet, or capital expenses, right? Like maybe they did a build out, right? That stuff's sitting on the balance sheet. You're not going to notice that. QuickBooks doesn't notice it. Keeper does. Waiting until year end to identify vendors, collect W-9s. Look, you guys, clients don't know what they're doing. You need to help them. Help them do this stuff, even though you hate it, but make it easier on yourself. And that's where I'm going to say, Chad, take it away.
Perfect. Well, thank you for walking us through that, Nancy. Yeah, absolutely. Like all of these pain points and challenges that you just bulleted out here, these are the reasons why you had to wait until the 31st and run to the post office at midnight to get those in the mail. It's the same reason that I went to the hospital because in addition to not handling stress very well that year, I didn't have the information that I needed. And had we been more proactive in communicating with our clients the expectation and the necessity to be collecting those W-9s all year long and stayed on top of them all year long, we wouldn't have been in that situation. So really, really important that we begin to address those pain points and challenges. And lucky for us, Keeper put together a tool within its platform that's going to help identify those vendors that may be 1099 eligible based on year-to-date spend. And it's going to help collect that W-9 from your vendor or your client. And it's even going to allow you to export that information once you've collected it in Keeper to your preferred 1099 filing platform. So really excited to jump in and share my screen here and walk through a little bit more about how Keeper does that. And yeah, just recapping what I just mentioned, these are the things that Keeper's going to do in terms of the 1099s to help you stay on top of it all year long, identifying those eligible vendors all year long. So that way you don't have to scramble at the end of the year to do that year-to-date spend calc. Collect the W-9s from your clients and your clients' vendors directly. And then really important, and Nancy and I talked about this pain point in preparing for this call, is tracking and storing that information on those vendors from year to year. So that way, when you go to look at who needs a W-9 next year, you don't request that W-9 from that same C Corp that you've requested it from for the past 5 years in a row. So keeping that information organized and knowing which vendors are, which entity types, which are going to be eligible, and keeping it in one place year after year is going to make that much easier. So Josh, if I can, I'll share my screen right now and walk everybody through what we're working with here in Keeper. Now, it's 11:30 here, so naturally I have 36 windows open, so bear with me while I share the right one.
And while he's talking about that, I want to mention that I did have a great experience where one of my team members, my senior accountant, Kendra, actually, she went through because she uses Keeper in her own bookkeeping firm as well as with us. And she wasn't sure if she trusted Keeper or not. And she actually went through and compared a bunch of vendors doing it in QuickBooks versus doing it in Keeper. And Keeper got it right. There are very few limitations that Keeper has and a lot of limitations that QuickBooks has. And I am not bad-mouthing QBO. I love it. I use it every day. It's fantastic. But we could not use their expense by vendor report. We couldn't use the 1099 report. We couldn't use, we ended up, I worked with Linda in Bookkeeping Buds. She was just like, here's what we do. We dive into this account and then we do it this way. And then we scroll through, we resort by dollar amount. All of these things, as a matter of fact, our old method for finding this stuff for QuickBooks is 4 pages long, our old SOP. And for Keeper, it's 1 page long.
Incredible. Well, just to kind of set the scene for anyone who might be new to Keeper, the screen that we have here is what we call our client close page, where you're going to be able to manage all of your client work here within Keeper on 1 page. That includes general tasks related to anything that you want to document in terms of workflow. But what really sets Keeper apart is our integration with QuickBooks Online and Xero to offer review tools that are going to help catch coding errors, things like expense inconsistencies, and allow you to communicate with your clients on things like uncategorized transactions and document requests throughout the year. Down here at near the bottom of the close page, we have a tool here called Prepare 1099s. And we talked about this a little bit already, but the preparation of the 1099s is not the hard part. It's the identification of the eligible vendors and the collection of the W-9s where most of us need help. And that's exactly what this report is going to do. So through our integration with QBO, we're able to identify any client vendors that meet that year-to-date spend threshold that could trigger 1099 reporting requirements. So all year long, Keeper's going to start pulling vendors into this report as soon as it hits that $600 in year-to-date spend threshold, excluding credit card spend by default. And then once a vendor is pulled into this report, Keeper also pulls in any available vendor profile information that's already been saved in QBO or Xero, which makes it really easy for the team to see when they're missing information related to those vendors. And if they are missing that information, Nancy just talked about this, that next step is to request the W-9. And you're able to do that here through Keeper from directly from your client or your client's vendor. You can request that W-9 directly from your client's vendor, assuming you've got an email address for them. And then when those W-9s are received, your team's going to be able to reference those W-9s here on file, autofill those client properties based on what's included here on that W-9, check that important box if that 1099 is going to be necessary, save it, and then all of that information is pushed back to QBO or Xero automatically, including a copy of that W-9. So that way you can maintain that from year to year. So really, really helpful in identifying those vendors and collecting and organizing that information all year long. So that way you don't have to be like me and get to the 7th of January, start trying to manually run those year-to-date spend calcs, start emailing vendors on the 7th of January. You've been doing this all year long. And at the end of the year, you've got all of your yeses. I need 1099s for these vendors in one report. You're then able to, as of today, or last week actually, export that information directly to your preferred 1099 preparation software. I know Nancy was excited about us sneaking that one in.
Oh my gosh. I got to tell you, shout out to Leslie Blaylock from Bookkeeping Buds. She posted in our Slack group. By the way, if you're not already a Bookkeeping Buds member and you are a bookkeeper, you run a bookkeeping firm, you just need to sign up for Bookkeeping Buds. I don't get like commissions or referrals for that. I just think everybody should do it. But Leslie said, oh my God, I love Keeper more than anything in the world. And I thought it was impossible to love them more. They have a Track 1099 import now, and it's great. There is somebody in chat mentioning that the DBA name doesn't come over, so that is some feedback for the team. But this is brand new. I mean, we didn't even get to use it this year. I'll be using it next year, but oh my gosh, our whole process is going to change next year because we're going to be able to like take a big chunk of what our workflow is out. I mean, this just keeps getting better, you guys.
Yeah, and that's That's one of the great things about being on the Keeper team. Like, our engineering team is keeping me on my toes because they are literally shipping new improvements and new features every single week. And so I wake up on a Thursday morning like today, get a Slack message about what's new, and I share it with folks on my demo calls that day. And yeah, so this particular export to track 1099 and tax 1099 was just announced today. I know it's been in the product for a bit. Good feedback in the chat. We'll definitely share that with the engineering team to clean that up and address that.
Hey, Chad, quick question for you.
Yeah, please.
This was written in the question section. Does Keeper read expense versus check in the checking account? Or what is it looking for to like differentiate between ACH, wire, debit card payments?
Yeah, great question. So by default, this year-to-date spend calculation is based on any spend that's not included in an account that is a credit card type in QBO or Zero. So that's the default. However, depending on what you want to include or exclude from that year-to-date spend calculation, you can exclude certain accounts. And in terms of identifying like the differences between checks, ACHs, you're able to exclude those transactions based on reference number. So a lot of folks will include like a debit card spend, just include debit as the reference on that transaction, so it can be included or excluded based on that specific reference.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah. And then one other thing that I do want to mention in terms of requesting that W-9 directly from your vendor, when you send that request off, your vendor is going to get a little email, and I'll try and pull that over and share it here. And we've got some standard language here. We're such and such accounting firm. We do the books for such and such client. We're looking for the W-9 for our records. Can you please upload it here? For that
Somebody
vendor,
in chat asked if this language can be edited.
Absolutely. Yeah,
All right.
we've got some default language here, but you can certainly edit that within your Keeper template section. And then for the client to provide that W-9, all they have to do is click this link. It will take them to a landing page that'll look like this. It'll be completely branded to match your firm. So that way it feels like a true extension of your services. They'll be able to upload that W-9 here directly if they have one on file, or they'll be able to fill one out on screen, filling in those fields as appropriate. And once they've done this, that's going to produce that signed PDF that you'll eventually maintain on file and see here, which and then that information.
Okay, y'all. Anybody who has not already seen this happening with Keeper, is your mind exploding right now? Because the first time I saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, that is worth the per client cost in Keeper alone. I could literally not use any other feature in Keeper.
And that was my reaction too, Nancy. And I have that conversation with folks literally every day. Like we offer a lot of great things in Keeper, but obviously this time of year is busy. And so I tell people, like, if you don't have the capacity to explore the client portal, you don't have the capacity to explore those other integrated review tools or the financial reporting module, this alone is worth getting into Keeper and making your 1099 season easier. It's literally plug and play. You connect that client, Keeper's going to generate this list of vendors based on that year-to-date spend, and you can start whittling away, removing those known C Corps or publicly traded companies until you're left with just those vendors that are going to need that 1099.
I want to highlight the fact that their Keeper is not 100%. There are a couple of small things. Be careful when you're clicking when we're not including the electronic payments. There are some weirdo, unusual electronic payments that will be excluded with that you should. It's not Keeper's fault. They're just like super weirdo situations. If you have clients who seriously have like never met a payment method they didn't like. And I know they're out there because I've met them, because I have one, and she makes me insane, you guys. If you have those clients, that's a situation where you really, really, really want to make sure that you're buying Jennifer Diamond's 1099 list and support 1099 support service, because it goes into the weeds, and it's like, well, wait, but there's this one, and you're like, oh shoot, that client uses that kind all the time. I need to figure that part out manually. And there was one other thing. Oh, the other thing is Keeper, because of the API, can't include journal entries. And I do have a decent number of clients who are restaurants and cafes and bars that use a point of sale system. And the way that we bring that data over into QuickBooks is through a summary journal entry on a daily basis. And there are payouts. So when you're paying the guy who like washes your windows every day, or he comes in once a week and he washes the windows or something like that, like that person needs a 1099, but they're not going to show up in this report. So it still gets you 99% of the way there. But if you know what the exceptions are, then you can make a note to handle those particular clients with those needs separately.
Yeah, really good call outs there, Nancy, especially regarding those like unique transactions that might fall under a vendor during the year. One option that we have here in Keeper is to identify all of those transactions that are currently included in that year-to-date spend calculation that Keeper is showing here. And if you have an oddball here that you need to exclude for one reason or another, you can simply exclude that. So that way it's not included in that year-to-date spend calculation.
Which is already like a huge improvement over any other way of doing this, right? Like, yeah, there's that extra step, but you can just exclude it.
Yeah. Much easier than manually exporting reports from QBO to Excel, running sum if formulas across a year's worth of data, and then trying to calculate those year-to-date spends from there.
Josh, is there any chance I can get a copy of the chat when this is over? Because there are so many good ideas in here that I'm going to implement for my own firm. Somebody said that they got a better response requesting W-9s through Keeper directly when they added a note that says, we understand that some companies will not need a 1099 at the end of the year. However, we do need to receive a W-9 for our records. I like the second this call ends, I'm going into Keeper and I'm editing the language to include that. I think it's such a good idea. So, but I know there are other gems in here. And so if there's any way to download that chat, I want a copy.
100% can totally do that. Nancy, I'm curious, when you engage with new clients, are you letting them know, in the first couple of meetings that you're going to be reaching out through Keeper to their vendors requesting a W-9? How does that process work?
So it's kind of a funny question because we haven't been accepting new clients for a really long time. So we're at capacity and we're actually firing clients left and right. However, an answer to a similar question is we just onboarded clients with Keeper this year. Like, this is our first year using Keeper. I mean, it's been a game changer for us. And when we did that, we let them know that this was something that we were going to be taking care of for them, and that the process was going to change. And then what ended up happening is it went so well and clients loved it so much that we ended up with two interesting things. One is that people who had wanted to DIY 1099s in the past no longer wanted to DIY them. They wanted us to do them, which again, mixed blessing there. But I believe in protecting my clients from themselves. So we ended up with more people requesting us to do them. These are people who were using Keeper for other things. I mean, like, we're using Keeper as our client portal communication, all the monthly close stuff, all the stuff that we're not talking about here yet. Different webinar. Go see the panel discussion that I did with Deb Kilsheimer recently. So we ended up with people who were like, oh, wait, I'm using Keeper. I love Keeper. I want you to take care of our 1099s this year so that you can request the W-9s. And the other thing that happened, I already forgot what it was, but they're really happy. I mean, like, they love it. They really love it.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that.
Oh, I know their vendors are happy. Like, the vendors are happy because, like, nobody wants to do this, you guys. The vendors don't want to do it. The clients don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. Keeper doesn't want to do it. 1099s suck. You just have to make it suck less. You have to make it suck as little as possible.
Yep. I know you're not taking on new clients, but an interesting anecdote. I think Tyler Otto said this. Like when he would send these emails out, he was actually getting potential new clients because the vendors were interested in the service he was using, and it was a form of marketing, which is super interesting.
I mean, I think I saw that in one of the recommendations. Maybe it was my keeper rep, Sean, who is awesome. Shout out to Sean. But it was like, why isn't my bookkeeper doing this? Is what the vendors think, right? Which makes sense. Like, why isn't my bookkeeper doing this? Because now we all can, and it's super affordable.
Yep. Chad, I'm gonna pull out another question or two. I don't know if you're reading the chat or questions as well, but question from Deb: when you do an export of the 1099 lists, does it provide detail or just a total?
It provides the total that's going to be included. So if you export to tax 1099 or track 1099, it's exporting in the format that you're going to be able to use to import into that software. I've heard of requests specifically related to exporting transaction details, which I think makes a lot of sense in terms of just maintaining that documentation to understand how you arrived at that reportable balance that's going to end up on the 1099 that you eventually file. And I created a canny for that. So that way we can track that request, and we can get Kenny and the engineering team on that for the future.
Yeah. I want to bring up a couple things that I don't know if people asked about these in the chat because I wasn't able to read the whole chat, but there are a couple things in particular that I wanted to highlight. When your client's books aren't up to date or complete, you obviously cannot do this. And so this is actually a way to sell annual clients on a monthly contract. And that is a huge thing that we are doing. We did not have the capacity to do that before. And because of Keeper, we are actually improving not just our 1099 season, but our tax season, because now we're saying to clients, we're not going to offer annual go in there and review your books and clean up everything and do your tax return. We are only accepting clients that are committing to a monthly or a quarterly one. This year, we actually have language that is in our SOP where we send it to the client. We say, unfortunately, it looks like there may be additional vendors for whom we need information, but insert issue here. There is a number of blank payees, or the books aren't up to date and reconciled, or we have outstanding questions. By when do you think you could have this taken care of? Is there anything we can do to help? That's what we have had to do manually in the past. And now once those clients are on Keeper, so we added a bunch of clients to Keeper just for 1099 season that we're like, they're going to be Keeper clients forever now, because we're not going to have to send out this anymore, because they're getting automated reminders from Keeper to, these are things that we need from you this month back in June. And so we're not waiting and cleaning that stuff up right now. And that's a common problem for tax preparers, but it's a problem for some bookkeepers as well, who deal with, and I know you guys know who I'm talking about, those clients who come to you once a year to have them do their books for the entire year. You're like, no, you know what? I don't want to do your books in January. I got better things to do. I want to do your books year round.
Absolutely. And, as a tax preparer, Nancy, like, all about busy season and how stressful it can be. But, sure, I think a lot of that for years for many folks has been because they get their butts kicked in January, trying to scramble with the 1099s, trying to scramble with the year-end cleanup. And if you're able to stay on top of that information all year long, you're going to be, in better shape to manage the busy season, to push all that work through.
It's made a huge difference for us. I mean, 1099s has made a huge difference for us, but Keeper overall, I mean, I am not, the two big changes that I made this year were Keeper and Right Tool, and just game changers. Life is better. I also want to call out Hughes and Strong. I know there's some fans in chat, so give them some love. Erica and Jody, they do consulting for people who are using Keeper, and I love it because Jody runs her own bookkeeping firm, so she already knows how to use this internally. Our Keeper rep is fabulous and he is amazing. And we get so much support, like unending generosity and support from Keeper, which is one of the reasons I love them. But they, you know, not everybody there, Chad does, but not everybody there has run their own firm and knows those things. And Hughes and Strong has helped us so much, partially with consulting and knowledge, but partially like I don't always have the staff to be able to handle some of these things, and they will do it for me. So Hughes and Strong, Hughes and Strong, if anybody, yeah, I'm seeing some love in the chat. They're amazing.
Love Jody and Erica.
Yeah, they're great. Well, I know at the top of the hour, Nancy, as always, your knowledge is just unbelievable. I feel like I can always reach out to you and you just know so much about everything, which is awesome. We appreciate your...
I wish I knew everything. I don't come anywhere close. I'm sorry, but tax, accounting, bookkeeping, nobody will ever learn everything. That's why we lean on each other. That's why I've got my bookkeeping buds, right? Like somebody else is an expert in that and somebody else is an expert in that and I'm the expert in these things. And together we're like one dang good accountant.
Yeah. No, this is an amazing community. I know there was a bunch of questions. I will do our best in getting back to everybody. I may have to lean on some 1099 experts to get those questions answered. But as always, thanks for joining us. We will share the resources, the deck.
Yeah, that last slide in the deck that didn't come up on screen, but everybody will get a copy of it, does have the link to Diamonds. Yep. And also my MSN article. And I didn't think to put questions W9 stuff in there, but
send them to me, Nancy. I got a little bit of time. Awesome. All right. Take care, everyone. Chad, thank you so much.
Thank you for spending time with us today, everyone. I love you.